Okay, so this is week 2 of our Philippians series. So last week we launched the series with a couple key foundational understandings about this particular book of the Bible. One is that this is a letter from Paul written while he was imprisoned, expecting probably not to be ever released from prison. And so Paul is writing to the Philippian church. It wasn't originally bound up in like a beautiful book like we have for most of our Bibles, but it was a letter that was passed out of a jail cell and carried to a church for the purpose of encouraging them to live godly lives in a messy world. So we hear that statement, living godly lives in a messy world. And for some of us, there's a part of that statement that stands out. Actually, I describe it like it's like Charlie Brown's teacher for part of the statement. Like, wah, 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 wah. My wife does it super well. I tried it. She laughed at me. She said, you should try it so they can laugh at you on Sunday morning. So that's my best effort. I've done my best. But anyway, Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 messy world. And we're like, that's it. That's my issue. Like the reason why I am not successful in living out my faith, the reason why things don't seem to fall into place for me, it's a messy world. It's a messy world. It's a messy world. That's the issue. That's the problem. That's what keeps me from operating like what God intended me to operate like. So we hear this, and it is so easy. Have you noticed how easy it is to notice the mess in the world around us? Like it's really, really easy to see when things aren't as they should be. Like I'll drive sometimes around here in Spearfish. Believe it or not, people run red lights in Spearfish. Have you noticed this? Like I think about the color red. We might want to call it Spearfish green. Because like we run red lights. We roll through stop signs. We go faster than the speed limit. Or at the least opportune times, people in front of me go under the speed limit. And I have to think, they probably know me. So no tailgating when you're the pastor of Countryside Church in Spearfish. You don't do that. So those are light things. There's other stuff, like we scroll our news feeds, or we go to websites, wherever it is that we read our news, and it's like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Wouldn't it be great if the point was to point out everything that's wrong with the world to God? Like if that was the call, wouldn't that be so much easier if we could just like in our conversation with God, we just say, God, here's like 6 things I noticed today about the way the world isn't as it should be. And God's like, on mission, great job. like we could do so well. I could do so well. You could do so well if that was the point. The problem is, that's not the point. The most important part of that statement, the messy world as Paul is describing it and as he lays it out, is the context in which we are learning to live godly lives. It's the context, not the point. So what if we took it one step further? Godly lives, but what about God-directed lives? Right? Like whatever circumstances that we are led into, whatever circumstances we experience, and to whatever end, which sounds so good, right? It's a really great statement. God, I will go to wherever you call me to be. I will do whatever you ask me to be, to whatever circumstances you call me to be in, and to whatever end. And it sounds good. Like that's very, very inspiring and so difficult to live our way into. Because when we think about life, we usually think about it along with or alongside terms like preserve, prolong, protect, ideal. Right? We have these terms that we bolt onto life. And it's not just that we think in these terms, it's that we focus on these terms. That those statements, maybe we have slightly different words that we use as we think about our own lives or a slightly different framework, but it's within this idea. We use them as a filter and a framework for making decisions about our lives. So like we think about a decision that we're trying to make and we say, does this preserve, prolong, protect, or lead to a more ideal life for me? Right? I'm going to make this decision. Does it preserve, protect, prolong, or lead to a more ideal life for me? This decision and this decision, we run it through this framework. Does this accomplish this for me? The problem is, when we do this in decisions related to life in general, we can also take this and apply it to our relationship with God. So we can look and we can be so focused on protect, preserve, prolong, ideal, that we can actually even convince ourselves that those words and that framework are actually the best way for God to accomplish his mission in and through our lives. We start to think that that's how God accomplishes things. So God speaks into our lives. He invites us into his mission. And then we turn around and we ask the same old question. God's saying, here's what I'm asking you to do. Here's where I'm sending you and what I'm asking you to do and what I'm asking you to obey me in. And we hear this, and then we say, but does this protect, preserve, prolong, or lead to a more ideal life for me? And we run it through the filter. Same way we run all the other decisions in our lives. We run it through this filter, which leads us away from God-directed lives and toward self-important lives, right? Where we think, I am so important, even as it relates to God's mission on this earth. I'm so important that I need to be protected, preserved, prolonged, and then the best context in which I should operate in for mission is ideal. How could God accomplish his mission without me? God needs me to do. It has to be me to do this thing. We've moved from God-directed lives to self-important lives. And this is not a new problem. Actually, it's a problem that the church has been working on for 2,000 years. Paul gives language to it as he's working through this conversation with the Philippian church, as he's putting pen to paper from non-ideal circumstances. He's writing and he's trying to help them understand this. Paul knows how hard this fight is, and he's fighting the same fight that he's encouraging the church to fight well. But here's the thing, Paul is starting to get toward the answer. He's starting to actually live faithfully in this kind of way. And so he's writing to the Philippian church, and as he's putting pen to paper, he's writing and he's saying, guys, I might not make it all the way through on this. The end might be here for me. But here's what I've been working on. Would you take where I've come and learn from it and then take it further? In your lifetime, maybe we could actually move forward on this issue that for the first few decades in the life of the church, we haven't solved yet. It's like Paul saying, learn from what I've learned and keep learning until you get it right. Second part of verse 18, we're picking right up right where we left off last week. Paul says now, yes, and I will rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. Paul says, I will rejoice. This is connected with the statement that he made in the first part of Philippians, where he's talking about, I will rejoice in whatever manner the gospel of Jesus is preached and proclaimed. With maybe motives that I might not agree with or I might find suspect, with hands and voices that are shaking as people are speaking courageously, maybe for the first time in their lives, the story of Jesus. And Paul says, I will rejoice as long as the gospel of Jesus is proclaimed. And so he's talking about joy. And joy, right, for Paul is not just a feeling of joy or response to particular circumstances. Joy is a state of mind that can handle the ups and downs of life. But now Paul extends it and he says, yes, and I will rejoice for another reason. I will rejoice because God is at work for his glory and for Paul's good. Paul understands this. He says, so I have reason to celebrate, reason to rejoice. He's learned that his present circumstances aren't the whole story. He's gone through enough situations and circumstances in his life where he realizes what God is doing is bigger and more important than whatever moment he finds himself in. Present circumstances aren't the whole story, and improved circumstances aren't the goal. The goal for Paul is very simple, that Christ would be honored. Right? In whatever circumstances Paul is in, whatever context he finds himself in, that Christ would be honored. And so when that's the goal and not ideal circumstances, then whatever circumstances he finds himself in, the circumstances aren't important. Christ being honored by his life is what's important. But Paul knows he's not alone. He says, through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. In the opening paragraphs of this letter, Paul moves seamlessly between prayer for the church and instruction and encouragement to the church. And then he moves from, this is how I thank God when I think about you, and then gives them some instruction, and then he prays for more and more of God's work in their lives. And then now in this moment, he says, I'm grateful that you pray for me. So it's not just that Paul is praying for the church. It's not just prayers for the church, but it's prayer from the church for Paul. Prayer at the foundation of everything that Paul is doing. It's the driving force for the mission that's in front of him. And so in all the ways, Paul is making it clear that his life is sustained through prayer and that he is helped by the Spirit of Jesus. And he says, this will turn out for my deliverance. This is Paul in his way talking about for his good. Now, when we tease this out, it might not be good like what we think about good, but Paul's saying, this will turn out for my deliverance. He's not talking about health. He's not talking about physical comfort or prosperity or wealth of any kind. He simply knows that however it works out, God will be glorified and he's going to be okay. And so the beautiful thing is that in the however it plays out statement, Paul isn't just accepting his fate, like hopelessly saying, well, whatever happens. Paul says this, listen to his words. He says, it is my eager expectation and hope with full courage that however it plays out, that Christ will be honored. That's beautiful language, positive language with all sorts of things that are swirling around Paul, all kinds of mess that Paul is working his way through. But this positive language, this beautiful picture that Paul is painting about God working through Paul's life makes his description of the possible outcomes of his situation jarring. It's unexpected. He says, whether by life or by death. Paul says, I'm not in control of my circumstances. So instead of losing hope, he doubles down on trust. It's like he's saying, I can't control my circumstances, but I can trust God in them, whatever those circumstances might be. And so Paul is longing for the Philippian church to take hold of that perspective, to take hold of that approach for themselves. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what God could do if a whole church said, it is our eager expectation, our hope, and with full courage that we live our lives so that Christ will be honored now and always and to whatever end. Can you imagine if a community of people of God would say, whatever it takes, whatever situations and circumstances we find ourselves in, we will with eager expectation and hope and courage do everything we can do so that God is honored in our midst. Now and always, and to whatever end. But that's not just a beautiful sentiment, something that we could use to inspire each other to deal with the difficult circumstances of our lives. It's an actual approach to life. This is what Paul is learning. He says this in verse 21, to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, yet which I shall not choose, yet which I shall choose, I cannot tell. I'm hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that's far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. There are two ways that you can say it doesn't matter. Right? One is hopeless. It's like, it doesn't matter. We just, whatever. The other is courageous. Paul says, it doesn't matter what end I come to. It doesn't matter what happens to me. Because for Paul, whether it's life or death, it doesn't matter. If it's life, he's going to keep working. If it's death, he's going to be with Jesus. And then he makes this statement to the church because he might think or might be aware of what they would think is like if God doesn't save him from this imprisonment and preserve his life, then like God has somehow failed Paul. Paul says, I'm just going to make my preference clear, just in case the church is worried about him and whether he's going to survive this ordeal. He says, I would prefer to be with Jesus. But I also know there's still work to do. So Paul's like, if this comes to like my next breath is in eternity with Jesus, I'm okay. However, I recognize that there's still work to be done. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your prayers and joy, or for your progress and joy in the faith, so that in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus because of my coming to you again. If Paul remains, it's for a very narrow set of reasons. Their progress and joy, and so that Christ is glorified. Right? Their progress and joy, and so that Christ is glorified. In those reasons for Paul's life being prolonged and preserved and protected, there's no personal benefit to Paul. No self-preservation, no inflated sense of self-importance. If he survives and is delivered, it's simply a testimony to encourage the church. Paul says, whatever happens to me, it all points to Jesus. And then Paul looks to the church. He's been describing his own journey, and now it's like you feel this shift in this letter as he writes, and it's like, okay, church, it's your turn. Let's talk about what this looks like lived out for you. You've seen me do it. Now do this one thing. Now the one thing it's a big thing, but he says it's one thing. He says only, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. This is a moment in Paul's letter where he actually gets political. Where Paul, one scholar would suggest that we translate this first sentence within this paragraph this way: let your life in the polis of God's realm be worthy of your allegiance to the good news. Paul is talking about like structure and place. In other words, live your lives like citizens in an outpost. It's like Paul is saying, so what if you thought of it this way? That you are here, and yet your citizenship is there. And so let your lives here reflect your commitment to there and your connection to there, so that when you live your life and you experience the things that you experience, you are an ambassador for there here. That you are bearing witness for what life is like and what life is supposed to be like there, here. So live your lives in a way that you're citizens of the kingdom, but your feet are planted in this place. Which this language would have made sense for people who lived in a Roman outpost, who understood that they are citizens of Rome, but they're operating here. And so here's how you live like citizens of the kingdom while you're here on earth. Paul gives 4 marks of a worthy of the gospel manner of life. Now, when Paul says worthy of the gospel, he doesn't mean worthy to receive the gospel or worthy to participate in God's saving work. This is worthy in response to what Jesus has done, not to earn what Jesus has done. But these 4 marks, he starts by saying, whether I come and see you or am absent. Whether I come and see you or am absent. This is consistent. A mark of a life that's worthy, a manner of life that's worthy of the gospel is that it's a consistent life. A few years ago, when I was, we were, as a family, had gathered for like a holiday meal at my parents' home, and my brothers and I were there, and our families were there, so my parents had their grandkids are around. And my mom, in the middle of this conversation, she steps back, and it's like there's her daughters-in-law and her kids, and my mom is like just looking at her family, and she makes a comment like, my boys, even as teenagers, they just were so well behaved. And I'm like, and my mom is delusional, right? So my brothers and I, like, awkward glances across the table. It's like, Mom, are you wanting your grandkids to think your kid? We're trying to sort all this out. And she says, because here's what I know. There was like a 2-hour time period between when the boys would get home from school and when I would get home from work. And she said, every time I came home from work, those boys they were sitting at their desks in their rooms, and they were doing their homework, and they were like so focused on the task at hand. And we're like, this is like utterly different than how we remember our childhood, right? So we're trying to sort this out. And finally, we look at each other and we're like, we're about to disappoint our mom in like the most deep, deep way. Like, so Mom, you didn't know this, but there was a spring on the garage door that when you hit the garage door opener as you were coming down the street was like a distinct sound, and we would hear that spring like make its noise. And you think it's impressive how well behaved we were when you got home. You should have seen how much we were able to accomplish in 45 seconds as you came down the road and pulled into the driveway and parked the car in the garage. Like, we could go from all sorts of stuff to like sitting quietly at our desk with our hearts like, slow down, slow down, slow down. Like, here we go. Whether Paul is with them or not, to be consistent. Paul says, I long for you to live your lives in such a way that like it doesn't matter if I'm with you or not, you are doing the right thing. Like, Paul could push it maybe a little further and say something like, your faith isn't rooted in my presence anyways. Your faith is rooted in the presence of Jesus in your life, and so he's with you always. So operate like he is with you always, but live consistent lives. He says, you are standing firm in one spirit. When times get tough, your move as a church and as a people of God is to come together and to stand firm together, to circle the wagons and deal with whatever situation is assaulting the church. With one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. One move is defense. The other is striving together for the faith of the gospel, consistent and united. So when it's time to strive side by side as people with one mind, a mind that's set on the gospel. And Paul says, not frightened in anything by your opponents, consistent, united, and courageous. These marks of a life, an approach to life that's worthy of the gospel. To have an approach to life, to have a courage that's rooted in Jesus that won't allow us to be shaken by anything our opponents would do to intimidate us. Right? Not that we're not afraid sometimes, not that we're not like feeling things as we stare down situations and circumstances that are far greater than we can handle on our own. But that we will have courage even when we're afraid. That we won't be pushed back, that we won't give up just because of the what looks like the strength and the skill set of the opposition. Paul continues, for it's been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. Paul says, not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. To live a life in a manner that's worthy of the gospel means that we not only believe, but that we operate in a certain way, that our behavior is different because of what we believe. So we live our lives consistent, united, courageous, and fully engaged, right? To whatever end, in whatever circumstances that we find ourselves in, we will be faithful to the mission that God has placed in front of us. right? To live our lives in a God-directed way. And so we step back, we look at this list that Paul wrote, and we feel the same things I think that the church would have felt 2,000 years ago when they read this letter for the first time. It's like, that is a lot. Like, how do we ever get to be all of that with all of this swirling around us and standing against us? But Paul, as he's written this letter, has put in a statement that actually holds it all together, that actually helps us get there. But if we're not careful, we miss the key to the whole conversation. The important thing that holds it all together, Paul says, for the sake of Christ. For the sake of Christ. So we're not just like hunkering down and biding our time as citizens of the kingdom, waiting for the kingdom to show back up for us. We're not asking questions like, does this protect, preserve, prolong, or lead to a more ideal life for me? We operate like an unstoppable kingdom force, fully devoted to Jesus and fully engaged in his mission. And so we look and we see these 4 marks of a manner of life that's worthy of the gospel, and we see them through this lens of, for the sake of Christ. If Paul 2,000 years ago, as he put pen to paper, looked to the Philippian church and said, it's your turn. It's like for us now, it's like Paul hands off responsibility and gives encouragement to the church 2,000 years ago. And then they sought to live this out. And then the next generation sought to live this out. And here we are 2,000 years later, and it's like the whole attention of Christian history is on this moment. Now there will be those who come after us too, but this is our turn. This is our opportunity to carry forward, to move forward, and to live God-directed lives, godly lives in a messy world. And so with this in mind, we do what the church would have done 2,000 years ago. We take these 4 marks of a manner of living that's worthy of the gospel, and we say, God, do your work in us. Help us see what we can't see. God, use this picture to help us do some diagnostic work in our lives so that we can be asking the right questions and making the right kind of commitments that help us live lives in a manner that's worthy of the gospel. So, like, consistent. We ask the question, am I consistent in my walk with God, whether or not others are watching? Right? Am I consistent in my walk with God, whether or not others are watching? If not, what is it that takes me off track? What distractions keep me from chasing after consistently this connection with God? How can we live lives that honor Christ? How can we live God-directed lives without consistent and intentional connection with God? How do we live lives that honor Christ if we're not taking time to hear what Jesus has to say to us about the way we're living our lives? So we make the commitment, for the sake of Christ, I will put into place a consistent and intentional rhythm of connection with God. I will live a God-directed life in connection with God. About united. Paul has given us this picture, one spirit, one mind, standing firm and striving together. So then we ask the question, do I have people around me who help me stand firm and who strive with me? Or am I on a solo mission? Or am I on a solo mission? Am I standing with others? Am I striving with others? Or am I on a solo mission? When things get difficult, do I huddle up with other people who are on the same mission that I'm on and we stand firm together? Or do I continue to make it a solo mission and try and stand firm by myself when I know I can't do it? So we make the commitment. For the sake of Christ, I will connect with others who are on the journey with me. And when things get tough and when the battle is raging, I will stand firm and strive alongside them. No more solo missions. Somebody might need to write that down and put that somewhere where they can be reminded of the way we're supposed to live our lives, united with others who are on this same mission with us. No more solo missions. Courageous. The question is this: does the messiness of the world inspire fear, or does it inspire me to courageously push back against the darkness that's around me? Or does the messiness of the world inspire fear, or does it inspire me to push back the darkness that's around me? When we see things that make us afraid, when we see things that shake us, when we see things that aren't as they should be, does that lead us to be afraid, or does that say, God, there must be something you want to do and I want to get in on what you want to do in this situation? So we make the commitment, for the sake of Christ, I will give my fears to God and ask him for courage when I'm afraid. And then fully engaged, very simple question: am I in the fight, or am I watching from the sidelines? Am I in the fight, or am I watching from the sidelines? Here's the commitment. For the sake of Christ, I will live my life on mission, living a God-directed life, carrying the good news of Jesus wherever I go. Right? We take these pieces and we see this as a lens to understand the way we're supposed to live our lives, and we say, for the sake of Christ. For the sake of Christ, I will be consistent. For the sake of Christ, I will be united. For the sake of Christ, I will live with courage. For the sake of Christ, I will be fully engaged in the mission that Jesus has placed in front of me, to live our lives in a manner that's worthy of the gospel.